The year 1941 was a turning point in the history of the world. December 7, 1941 was not just another day. It marked the day the United States was thrust into the heart of the Second World War. The attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese was more than just a military strike. It was a declaration of war that left an entire nation reeling in shock. The echoes of the explosions, the cries of soldiers, and the chaos of a nation caught off guard still reverberate through history. The entire landscape of global politics shifted that day. But amid the shock, one man stood to rally the American people and the world against the forces of tyranny. The President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, in the face of unparalleled devastation, rose to address the American people with a message that would define the future of the free world. His words, delivered with solemn determination, would change the course of history. Roosevelt's call to arms was not just about retaliation, it was about the survival of freedom. The nation was divided, confused, and unsure. But Roosevelt's words, like a beacon of hope, united them under a singular cause. His address, given just hours after the attack, spoke not only of vengeance but of the moral obligation to stand against evil. As the world turned its eyes toward the United States, the question loomed large. Would America rise to meet this challenge, or would it falter in the face of such overwhelming loss? Roosevelt's speech was more than just words. It was a command to rally, to resist, to fight. His declaration that the attack on Pearl Harbor would be remembered as a date which will live in infamy became a rallying cry for millions. The United States had been pushed into war, but Roosevelt's address was the spark that ignited the flame of American resolve. As Roosevelt's words echoed through the halls of Congress, they reverberated across the globe. In Britain, Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister, stood ready to offer his unwavering support. Churchill, a man who had already weathered countless storms, understood the gravity of the moment. His own country was fighting an all-out war against Nazi Germany. Britain was facing bombings, invasions, and an enemy intent on conquering all of Europe. But Churchill knew that the United States was crucial to the success of the Allied forces. Without the might of America, the Axis powers would have had no formidable opposition left. At that moment, Churchill's role as a leader was not just about defending Britain, it was about ensuring that the world did not fall into the hands of tyranny. He understood the significance of Roosevelt's words. He saw the path ahead, and he knew the stakes were higher than ever. The British Prime Minister, in a message of solidarity and defiance, would offer Roosevelt his unwavering commitment. The two leaders, separated by an ocean, would become the linchpins in the fight for democracy. It was clear to Churchill that the future of the world was now in the hands of the United States. But Roosevelt's message was not just one of unity with Britain. It was a clarion call to the American people. With Europe already embroiled in war and Asia now in flames, Roosevelt knew that the United States could no longer remain neutral. The brutal attack on Pearl Harbor had left no room for doubt. Roosevelt's words were a declaration not just of war but of a moral obligation to protect the freedoms that many had taken for granted. As Roosevelt spoke, the tension was palpable. His address, a mere 16 minutes long, was filled with urgency and emotion. He called upon Congress to declare war, and in the same breath, he assured the American people that this would be a war fought not just for the survival of the United States, but for the survival of liberty itself. Roosevelt's voice was calm, but beneath the surface was a deep and unmistakable sense of resolve. It was clear that America was no longer on the sidelines. The attack had brought the nation to the brink, but now it would rise to meet the challenge. As Roosevelt concluded his address, the weight of his words hung in the air. It was not just a call to arms, it was a call to arms with purpose. He reminded the American people that this war was not one of their choosing, but it was one they could not afford to lose. This would be a fight for the future of the world. And in that fight, America would play a central role. The words were powerful. But what was left unsaid was perhaps even more significant. Roosevelt's message had an urgency that could not be ignored. The world was watching, and the United States had now stepped onto the global stage as a beacon of hope. But the battle ahead would not be easy. It would be one of unimaginable sacrifice and struggle. And in the months that followed, the American people would have to rally behind Roosevelt's vision of a world free from tyranny and oppression. Churchill, in his own speeches, had often emphasized the significance of the moment. But now, with America officially entering the war, he knew that their combined strength would be their greatest weapon. It was no longer a matter of British survival alone. Now, it was a matter of global survival. As Roosevelt's words reverberated around the world, it became clear that the future of freedom was at stake. The days that followed Roosevelt's declaration were a whirlwind of activity, emotion, and preparation. The air was thick with uncertainty, yet also filled with a sense of urgency and purpose. America, once hesitant to become embroiled in the chaos of Europe and Asia, was now a full participant in the war. The attack on Pearl Harbor had shattered any illusions of neutrality, and the American people were determined to defend their way of life, no matter the cost. The words spoken by Roosevelt had ignited a fire within the nation, but the true test of resolve was yet to come. In Washington, the halls of Congress were charged with the same urgency felt by the American public. The decision to declare war on Japan was not taken lightly. In fact, it was one of the most monumental moments in American history. Congress, in an unprecedented show of unity, voted overwhelmingly to support Roosevelt's call to action. The United States had now officially entered World War II. Yet Roosevelt's speech had done more than just unite the nation, it had galvanized the American people. From the factories to the battlefields, every citizen understood that their country was now in a fight for its very existence. It was not just about retaliation against Japan. It was about preserving the freedoms that had made America the beacon of hope in a turbulent world. The sacrifice that lay ahead would be immense, but Roosevelt had framed the war as a moral cause, one that transcended borders and nationalities. Across the Atlantic, Winston Churchill watched with a mixture of relief and anticipation. He had long known that the entry of the United States into the war was essential for victory. Britain had fought alone for too long against the Axis powers, and though they had managed to survive, they were on the brink of exhaustion. The Luftwaffe's relentless bombing campaign had reduced much of Britain to rubble, and the threat of invasion loomed large. Now, with Roosevelt's speech, the United States was officially on their side. Churchill's words, once defiant, now carried a sense of hope that the tide of war might finally be turning in their favor. Churchill's next speech, delivered shortly after Roosevelt's, was a powerful expression of solidarity. He praised Roosevelt's leadership, acknowledging that America's entry into the war would be the decisive factor in defeating the Axis powers. But Churchill's speech also emphasized the sacrifices that lay ahead. He warned that the war was far from over and that the road to victory would be long and fraught with difficulty. The threat of Nazi Germany in Europe, coupled with Japan's aggression in the Pacific, created a global battlefield unlike any the world had ever seen. But now, with the combined strength of the United States and Britain, the Allies were ready to push back. Churchill's message was clear. This was not just a war for survival. It was a war for civilization itself. The Axis powers, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler and Emperor Hirohito, represented a direct threat to everything that the Allies held dear. The fight was not just against military aggression, but against a dangerous ideology that sought to extinguish democracy, freedom, and human dignity. The stakes were not only national but global. If the Axis powers were allowed to succeed, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for the countries involved, but for the future of the world. As Roosevelt and Churchill aligned their forces, the rest of the world watched in anticipation. The entry of the United States into the war had profound implications for the global balance of power. For years, many nations had feared that the United States would remain on the sidelines, content to let Europe and Asia bleed out in their respective conflicts. But now, with Roosevelt's speech, the United States had emerged as the most powerful force in the fight against tyranny. The American people, for their part, were ready. They had been shaken by the attack on Pearl Harbor, but now they were determined to defend their country and their way of life. In factories across the country, women and men alike took up the mantle of wartime production. The wheels of industry turned faster than ever before as the United States shifted into wartime mode. Every sector of society was mobilized to support the war effort, from manufacturing weapons and supplies to recruiting soldiers. The United States was now an arsenal of democracy, ready to supply the Allies with the resources they needed to turn the tide of war. But the war was not without its challenges. The United States, despite its vast resources, was not invulnerable. The Pacific Theater, in particular, posed a significant challenge. Japan's imperial ambitions in the Pacific had already brought them to the doorstep of Australia, and the Japanese fleet was poised to strike again. The United States would have to fight on two fronts, the Pacific and Europe, and the outcome of the war was far from certain. In Europe, the situation was equally dire. Nazi Germany had conquered much of the continent, and Britain was struggling to hold its ground. The Battle of Britain had been a testament to the resilience of the British people, but it had come at a high cost. The Royal Air Force had fought valiantly to defend the skies, but the threat of a German invasion remained ever present. Churchill knew that the war could not be won on the British Isles alone. The United States, with its vast industrial capacity and military strength, was the key to defeating Hitler and the Axis powers. As the weeks turned into months, the cooperation between Roosevelt and Churchill deepened. They met regularly, strategizing and coordinating their efforts. Their partnership became a symbol of hope for the world, a beacon of light in the darkest days of the war. The decisions made in those early meetings would shape the course of the war and the future of the world. The Allies would focus on a two-pronged approach, fighting in the Pacific to neutralize Japan, while simultaneously mounting a campaign to liberate Europe from the grip of Nazi Germany. But even as the plans were set into motion, the war's true cost began to reveal itself. The sacrifices of the American people, the British, and the Allied forces would be immeasurable. Soldiers would die on foreign shores, and civilians would endure untold hardships. The war would require every ounce of resolve, every drop of courage, and every bit of resource the Allies could muster. But Roosevelt's message had given them the clarity and purpose they needed. They were not just fighting for victory. They were fighting for the survival of everything they held dear. The world was now locked in a battle for its future. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome was uncertain. But one thing was clear. The United States had entered the war with a determination to fight to the bitter end. Roosevelt's words had lit a fire that would burn until victory was achieved, and Churchill's steadfast resolve ensured that Britain would never surrender. Together, they would face the Axis powers with unwavering courage. As the war raged on, the combined efforts of the United States and Britain began to turn the tide. The sheer power of the American industrial machine, combined with the unwavering resolve of the British people, brought hope to a world that had long been teetering on the brink of destruction. Roosevelt's leadership and Churchill's indomitable spirit proved to be the backbone of the Allied resistance. The plans they set into motion, though fraught with sacrifice, would eventually lead to the downfall of the Axis powers. In the Pacific, the United States engaged in brutal battles from Midway to the Philippines, each victory driving the Japanese forces back. The cost was staggering, with thousands of soldiers lost and the toll on civilians in the Pacific Islands devastating. But each battle brought the Allies one step closer to victory. The Japanese Empire, once seemingly invincible, began to unravel under the relentless pressure of American might. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would forever alter the course of history, marking the end of Japan's imperial ambitions and bringing an abrupt, painful conclusion to the war in the Pacific. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Allies' strategic campaigns were gaining ground. The D-Day invasion of Normandy in June 1944 marked a pivotal moment in the war as Allied forces stormed the beaches of France, liberating occupied territories and beginning the march toward Berlin. It was a turning point in the European theater. No longer was the war just a matter of defense. Now the Allies were on the offensive, pushing the Nazis back with every passing day. The liberation of France was followed by the liberation of Italy, Belgium, and eventually Germany itself. But even as the Allies closed in on Berlin, the cost of the war continued to mount. The death tolls were staggering, and cities across Europe lay in ruins. The suffering was immense, but the promise of victory was now within reach. The United States, under Roosevelt's direction, had mobilized not just an army, but an entire society for war. They had proven their resilience, their commitment to defeating tyranny, and their ability to lead the world in a time of unparalleled crisis. The final days of the war were marked by intense fighting and desperation. Adolf Hitler, trapped in his bunker, realized that his dream of world domination had come to a bloody and bitter end. On April 30th, 1945, he took his own life, marking the symbolic collapse of Nazi Germany. But even as victory seemed certain, the sacrifices continued. Roosevelt, the man who had led the United States through the darkest days of the war, did not live to see the final victory. He passed away on April 12, 1945, just weeks before the war's conclusion. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy lived on in the world he had helped shape. In the aftermath of the war, Roosevelt's call to resistance, his call for unity, and his call to fight for freedom would never be forgotten. Churchill, though weary from years of battle, stood as a testament to the power of courage in the face of adversity. Together, these two leaders had inspired millions, changed the course of history, and preserved the values of democracy and freedom. Their partnership had been more than just a military alliance. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unyielding belief that good could triumph over evil. The war was over, but the work was far from complete. The world, devastated by years of conflict, now looked to rebuild. Nations had to heal, alliances had to be forged, and the wounds of the war needed to be addressed. The United States, with its newfound power and responsibility, took its place as the leader of the free world. As the dust settled, one thing was clear. The world owed its survival to the sacrifices made by millions, the leadership of Roosevelt and Churchill, and the courage of countless ordinary men and women. Roosevelt's call for resistance had been answered, not just by the United States, but by the entire world. The war had been won, but the real challenge was just beginning. In the years that followed, the lessons of the war would shape international relations, guide the development of democracy, and ensure that the horrors of the past would never be repeated. The call to resistance, made by Roosevelt in the face of unimaginable loss, was more than a rallying cry. It was a reminder that when the forces of tyranny threaten the very foundations of freedom, the world must stand united. The legacy of that call and the partnership between Roosevelt and Churchill would echo throughout history. And as the world moved forward, it would carry with it the knowledge that unity, determination, and unwavering resolve could overcome even the darkest of times. The story of their leadership, their courage, and their unwavering commitment to a free world was not just a chapter in history, it was a testament to the power of the human spirit. And as long as those lessons endure, the world will never forget the price that was paid for liberty and the strength required to defend it.